They thought they could bury my father's legacy before his grave was even cold. My brothers stood in that lawyer's office, wearing masks of grief, while counting their shares of a fortune they didn't earn. They sold the house, the land, and my childhood behind my back, thinking I was just the emotional daughter who wouldn't put up a fight. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't check the blue folder in the attic. I'm Lily Rose, and this is how I turned their greed into their greatest regret. The rain in Seattle doesn't just fall, it clings to you. It felt particularly heavy the morning of the funeral. I stood under a black umbrella, watching the dirt hit my father's casket, feeling a hollow ache that had nothing to do with the weather. My brothers, Elias and Julian, stood on either side of me. To anyone else, we looked like a grieving family. To me, we felt like three strangers tied together by a name and a looming inheritance. Dad was an eccentric man, a collector of old things and even older secrets. He'd built an empire out of vintage restorations and real estate, but he lived like a man with nothing to prove. "It's for the best, Lily," Elias whispered as we walked back to the car. His voice had that oily, patronizing tone he used whenever he was about to do something selfish. "The estate is a burden. You shouldn't have to worry about the upkeep of that old Victorian house." I wiped a stray tear, nodding absently. I thought he was being protective. I didn't realize he had already signed the listing agreement 3 days before Dad even passed away. The betrayal didn't hit me until a week later. I arrived at the family estate, a sprawling, 3-story masterpiece filled with hand-carved oak and memories, to find a sold sign hammered into the front lawn. My key didn't work. The locks had been changed. I hammered on the door until Julian opened it. He looked flushed, holding a clipboard. Behind him, movers were wrapping Dad's antique clocks in bubble wrap. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Julian, what are you doing?" "We had a meeting, Lily," he said, not meeting my eyes. "The three of us. You didn't show up, so we moved forward. The buyer wanted a quick closing. It's done. The money will be split after the taxes are cleared." "What meeting? I was never invited." I pushed past him, my heart racing. "This house was meant to stay in the family. Dad promised." Dad was old and confused, Elias shouted from the top of the stairs. He descended slowly, looking like a man who had already won. "There was no official will found in the safe, Lily, just the standard state laws. 2/3 to the sons, 1/3 to the daughter. We're just expediting the process." The air left my lungs. They were lying. I knew Dad had a will. He had shown it to me years ago. But the safe was empty. They had purged his office before I could even find my footing. I looked at their faces, faces I had grown up with, and saw only calculations. They weren't brothers anymore. They were liquidators. "I need my personal things," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, hard whisper. "The stuff in the attic. You can't sell my childhood." Elias shrugged. "Take whatever junk you want. The new owners take possession in 48 hours. Don't be here when they arrive." I climbed the stairs, the sound of my own footsteps echoing like a countdown. The attic was dusty and smelled of cedar and old paper. I began dragging boxes toward the door, my mind spinning. How could they do this? How could they sell the ground out from under me? I reached for a heavy trunk in the far corner, the one Dad used to keep his most prized blueprints in. As I pulled it, a loose floorboard shifted. Underneath, tucked away from the prying eyes of greedy sons, was a weathered blue folder. I opened it, and my breath hitched. It wasn't a copy. It wasn't a draft. It was a deed of gift, dated only a month ago, notarized and sealed. My father knew his sons. He knew their gambling debts and their hollow hearts. The paper didn't just give me a share. It gave me everything. Before we move on to what I found inside that folder and how I walked back down those stairs, I want to take a moment to welcome you all. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it for you? Let me know in the comments. I love reading where my Lily Calm Stories family is tuning in from. I sat on the dusty floor, reading the words over and over. Dad hadn't just left me the house. He had transferred the entire holding company, the land, the businesses, and the very ground Elias and Julian were currently standing on, into a private trust in my name. The will they were looking for didn't matter. This paper made the will obsolete. I stood up, tucked the folder under my arm, and felt a strange, icy calm wash over me. I wasn't the emotional daughter anymore. I was the owner, and it was time to give my brothers their first and last eviction notice. I walked down those stairs slowly, feeling the weight of that blue folder against my ribs. Below me, the sound of tearing tape and shifting furniture filled the foyer. Elias was on his phone, laughing, probably already spending the commission in his head. Julian was checking items off a list, looking like a common clerk. "Done already?" Elias asked without looking up. "I told you, Lily, it's easier to just let go. Don't take more than you can carry." "Oh, I'm taking exactly what I can carry, Elias," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the shaking grief from an hour ago. Something in my tone made him stop. He lowered his phone and narrowed his eyes at me. "What's that look for? Don't start a scene. The movers are right there." I didn't say a word. I walked over to the grand dining table, the one where we used to have Sunday dinners before Mom passed, and laid the blue folder flat on the wood. I flipped it open to the final page, where the gold seal of the notary caught the dim afternoon light. Julian wandered over, curious. "What is this? Another one of Dad's old sketches?" "Read the header, Julian," I whispered. He leaned in, his brow furrowed. As his eyes scanned the legal jargon, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. He looked at Elias, then back at the paper, then at me. "This is a deed of gift," Julian stammered. "It says irrevocable transfer of all residential and commercial holdings to Lily Rose." "Give me that." Elias snatched the paper. He read it once, then twice, his hands starting to tremble. "This is fake. This has to be a forgery. We checked the safe. We checked his lawyer's files." "You checked the files for a will, Elias," I replied, crossing my arms. "A will is something that can be contested. A will goes through probate. But Dad was smarter than you gave him credit for. He didn't leave this to chance. He gifted the entire estate to a private trust in my name while he was still alive. This isn't part of his estate. It's mine. It has been mine for 30 days. The silence that followed was deafening. The movers paused, sensing the shift in the room's oxygen. "You can't do this," Elias hissed, stepping into my personal space. "We already signed the sale agreement with the developers. We took a deposit." "Then I suggest you find a way to pay them back," I said, stepping forward until we were nose to nose. "Because you sold property that didn't belong to you. In legal terms, that's fraud. In my terms, that's the end of our relationship." Julian looked like he wanted to cry. "Lily, we have debts. You know Elias's firm is struggling, and I put a down payment on a place in the city based on this money." "That sounds like a personal problem," I said, feeling a coldness I didn't know I possessed. "Now, tell the movers to stop. Everything they've packed stays here, and then I want you both out." "Out?" Elias barked. "This is our childhood home." "No," I corrected him. "This is my house, and right now you're trespassing. If you aren't gone in 10 minutes, I won't call a lawyer. I'll call the police, and I'll hand them this paper along with the names of the developers you tried to scam." Elias looked like he wanted to tear the folder apart, but he knew the moment he did, he'd be destroying the only thing keeping him out of a courtroom. He looked at Julian, who just hung his head in shame. They left with nothing but their car keys and the bitter taste of defeat. As I watched their taillights disappear down the rain-soaked driveway, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. But as I looked around the quiet, empty foyer, I realized for the first time in years, the house felt like it was breathing again. But the battle wasn't over. Elias wasn't the type to walk away from millions of dollars without a fight, and the developers he had signed with weren't just businessmen. They were the kind of people who didn't take no for an answer. The victory over my brothers felt hollow the moment the sun went down. The Victorian house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fortress under siege. I spent the evening moving from room to room, locking every window and drawing the heavy velvet curtains. I kept the blue folder on the kitchen island, a paper shield against the storm I knew was coming. Around midnight, a pair of headlights cut through the fog of the driveway. It wasn't my brother's sedan. It was a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. Two men in sharp, expensive suits stepped out. They didn't knock like guests. They pounded on the door like they owned it. I opened the heavy oak door just an inch, keeping the security chain engaged. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice as cold as the night air. "Lily Rose?" the taller one asked. He didn't wait for an answer. "I'm Marcus Thorne, representing Blackwood Innovations. We have a signed purchase agreement for this property and the surrounding acreage. Your brothers mentioned there was a small clerical misunderstanding regarding the title." "It's not a misunderstanding, Mr. Thorne," I replied. "It's a void contract. My brothers had no legal right to sell this land. The property isn't for sale." Thorne leaned in, a polished, predatory smile on his face. "Miss Rose, we've already sunk $500,000 into the permits for the development project on this hillside. We have timelines. We have investors. We don't really care about family squabbles. We care about the deed." "Then you should have done a more thorough title search," I said, closing the door slightly. "Because if you had, you'd see that I am the sole owner. Now please leave my property before I report you for harassment." "We aren't leaving until we discuss a settlement." "Your brothers took a very large deposit, Lily. A deposit they've already spent on offshore debts. If this deal falls through, they go to prison. Is that what you want? To be the sister who sent her own blood to a cell?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew Elias was reckless, but I hadn't realized he was desperate enough to take under-the-table money from people like Thorne. "They made their choice," I said, though my hand trembled on the door handle. "Think about it," Thorne called out as I finally shut the door and bolted it. "We'll be back tomorrow with the paperwork. You can either sign and be a very rich woman, or you can keep this dusty old house and watch your family crumble from the gallery of a courtroom." I leaned my back against the door, sliding down until I hit the floor. The silence of the house felt heavy now. I looked at the old grandfather clock in the hall, a piece my father had restored with his own hands. Elias and Julian had tried to sell my soul to save their own. I realized then that the last paper wasn't just a deed. It was a burden. But as I flipped through the blue folder again, I noticed something I had missed in my initial shock. Tucked behind the deed was a small, handwritten note from my father, dated just days before he fell ill. "Lily, my brave girl, they will come for the wood and the stone, thinking that is where the value lies. But they've forgotten what lies beneath the roots of the old willow. Don't let them dig, Lily, not until you've read the map." The old willow. It stood at the edge of the property, overlooking the valley. My father used to spend hours there, staring at the horizon. I grabbed a flashlight and a heavy coat. If Thorne and his investors were this desperate for a plot of land in the middle of nowhere, it wasn't because they wanted to build condos. There was something else here, something that made this inheritance a target. I stepped out into the mud, the wind whipping my hair across my face, and headed toward the giant, weeping silhouette of the tree at the edge of the dark. The mud pulled at my boots as I stumbled toward the edge of the property. The old willow tree looked like a ghost in the moonlight, its long branches weeping in the wind. I reached the trunk, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Don't let them dig, Lily." My father's words echoed in my head. I began to scan the ground with the flashlight, searching for anything out of place. Near the base, tucked between two massive gnarled roots, I saw it, a small, rusted iron ring protruding from the earth. I cleared away the wet leaves and dirt, revealing a heavy stone slab. With every ounce of strength I had, I pried it open. Inside wasn't gold or jewelry. It was a lead-lined box containing a series of geological surveys and a second deed, one for the mineral rights of the entire valley. My father hadn't just been a restorer. He had discovered a massive lithium deposit right beneath our feet years ago. He had kept it secret to protect the land from being stripped by corporations like Blackwood Innovations. Thorne didn't want to build condos. He wanted a mine, and my brothers had sold the surface rights for a fraction of what the ground was actually worth. The next morning, Thorne arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, flanked by a legal team and my two brothers, who looked disheveled and terrified. "Have you reconsidered, Lily?" Thorne asked, holding out a pen like a peace offering. "Sign the transfer, and the clerical error disappears. Your brothers stay out of jail, and you walk away with $5 million. Elias stepped forward, his eyes bloodshot. "Please, Lily, just sign it. We're in over our heads. These people, they aren't kidding." I looked at Elias, then at Julian, and finally at Thorn. I pulled a new set of papers from my coat pocket. Not the blue folder, but a copy of the mineral rights and a formal injunction I had filed electronically through Dad's old lawyer at Dawn. "I'm not signing anything, Mr. Thorn," I said, my voice echoing off the porch. "In fact, I've already contacted the Environmental Protection Agency. This land is now a registered conservation easement. My father filed the preliminary paperwork months ago. I just finalized it. You can't dig here. Not for condos, and certainly not for lithium." Thorn's face turned a violent shade of purple. The predatory smile vanished. "You have no idea what you've just done. You've destroyed a billion-dollar opportunity." "No," I replied. "I've saved a home, and as for my brothers," I turned to Elias and Julian. "The deposit you took? That's your debt now. I've already instructed the estate lawyer to liquidate your personal holdings to pay back Blackwood Innovations. You won't go to jail, but you will be starting from zero, just like you tried to do to me." Thorne stormed off, his legal team scurrying behind him. The big deal was dead. Elias looked at the house, then at me, realizing he had lost everything: his money, his pride, and his sister. "Lily, we're family," he whispered. "Family doesn't sell the ground their sister sleeps on, Elias," I said, stepping back into the house. "Don't come back." I closed the door and locked it for the last time. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the legacy my father had fought to protect. I sat by the window, watching the rain stop and the sun break through the clouds. I had the last paper. I had the land. And for the first time in my life, I had peace. Would you have forgiven your brothers if they were facing jail time, or was Lily right to let them lose everything? If you loved this story of justice and secrets, make sure to subscribe to Lily Calm Stories for more.